Cian Tracey of the Irish Independent is with us in studio. Cian, you're very welcome. How are you?
Morning, lads. How are you?
We've asked you to give us some idea of what we should be watching this weekend in the Champions Cup. But before we do that, you've actually been covering the Women's Six Nations for the last couple of weeks. It's tricky. It's tricky from an Ireland perspective because we are all trying to give the team an opportunity and an even break and an opportunity to, bed in this new culture, the new playing group, the new coaching ticket. But the results have been poor so far, and we could be facing a long period of poor results before we start seeing any uptick.
We could, but that's why I think this Sunday against Italy is absolutely massive. I suppose like the two defeats have been disappointing, but they've both been against professional outfits. Albeit Wales have only recently changed, and I don't think there was any shame in losing to France away from home. No Irish women's team has ever beaten France on French soil, but I think it was the manner of the defeat, like 27 handling errors, 44% success rate after line out, 60 after scrum. So they're deep-rooted issues, but I don't think we should be surprised really that this is happening. I suppose the women's game has been neglected for so long, and the chickens are probably coming home to roost now. So unfortunately there is going to have to be a bit of pain before this team get back on track. But like I said, if they don't beat Italy this weekend, they're staring down the barrel of a wooden spoon. And for all that, we do need to have patience, and it will be a long-term plan. You still got to get some performances and a couple of results along the way. So yeah, it's massive this weekend, Ger.
How long does something like this take? Because it is a proper reboot of something that was, as you said, neglected.
I personally think it's going to take at least a couple of years. Not making a World Cup when so few nations are competitive enough to qualify for it in the first place is just such a massive blow. I think you're seeing it in terms of the depth or the lack of depth. Like, so for example, the first day against Wales, there was 3 unused replacements, which is unheard of in the modern game. Last weekend, despite the fact that the scrum was being absolutely dismantled, you had Linda Zhugang, who's obviously a star and one of Ireland's strongest players, but for the second week in a row, she played 80 minutes. And it's actually like a conversation I was having with you guys, I remember a few weeks ago, when Andy Farrell basically had Tyg Furlong and Andrew Porter go almost a full 80 minutes in Paris. So there's kind of parallels between the men's team. So, but one of the props, Chloe Pearce, didn't get on in France either. So look, there's deep-rooted issues, and because they've so little game time on the training pitch to get things right, you can't just suddenly expect the scrum and the line-out to be better this weekend. So it's such a tricky balance because they won't go into camp until Thursday and they're playing on Sunday. So you compare that to the men, or even to the likes of France, England and Wales, who'll have been in camp all week preparing for their game. It's it's so tricky.
Yeah, they're in work today and yesterday, or in college doing stuff. So it is very difficult. We'll come back to that obviously, and we've a full preview show later on this week to preview that game, to look back on the France game as well. Let's talk a little bit more about the Munster Leinster fallout, because we're talking about the Champions Cup games worth watching this weekend, and obviously we'll keep a very close eye on these. Where are Munster at the moment? Because Alan Quinlan was unwilling to press the panic button yesterday when we were talking to him, but I'm not sure. I kind of feel like it's getting pretty close to it.
Yeah, like, I think the one thing you'd say is, and first of all, I think it's really important for any discussion around the game last weekend is to acknowledge how good Leinster were. I mean, I thought at times it was like watching Ireland, not just the personnel that were involved, but also the slickness in their backline moves. So I think it's important to state that, but I just can't get away from the fact that Munster wanted Johan van Graan to stay on, and he would be staying on if he didn't have his head turned by a bucket load of cash from Bath. Like, I just think that's so damning to the organisation as a whole. I think it's interesting. I would say, like, I obviously have a lot of friends and family who go to Munster matches every week from back home, and like they've been disillusioned for a long time. But I think there's been like a cohort of, I would say, Munster fans online who would have quite strong voices in the social media sphere, but I think they've, like, stayed patient, but I think that is starting to turn now as well. And you can see it in the attendances, and like personally, I'm so fed up of hearing the same old excuses that, oh, there's confirmations on, there's communions on. That's what it was before. I heard that mentioned again last weekend. I know COVID has an issue in the GA clashes and stuff, but Munster's attendances in big games hasn't been the same as what it was back, certainly when I was going to games. Like, I remember days when you wouldn't get a ticket for let's say like a big English team coming to town as Exeter are in 2 weeks, you just wouldn't be able to get a ticket. Like there was times where you had to be queuing overnight in the streets of Limerick to a Ticketmaster to get tickets. Like now I know the glory days are so far away, are so far removed from where they are now, but it's the fall from there to where they are now. Like to not be able to sell out a Leinster game or even come close to it, like I just think is so disappointing. And how can you expect, and I'm not having a go at Munster fans by the way here, because how can you expect supporters to pay their hard-earned money to go watch a team who they're not good to watch, let's face it. I did think they tried to play a little bit more against Leinster, but when they did try to do that, the gulf was almost shown to be as big, if not bigger than it ever has been. So there's serious, massive issues. I also can't believe that they haven't announced their head coach yet. Like they've known for so long, and I know the IRFU and David Nucifora, they're the ones who are in charge of this appointment, but
they always get stuff so right as well. I mean, I'm delighted that the massive investment that we've made in Nucifora and all that part, that he's the one charged with making this decision.
But the point is, like it looks like Graham Rowntree will be the new Munster head coach.
And that might be the right thing,
But like, it might not be. But this is my point. So when Johan van Graan got appointed, he was a relative rookie, but he had never been a head coach. Now, I know Graham Rowntree has savage experience with the Lions, with England, with Munster, and he's hugely well regarded in Munster. The players really like him. They love playing for him. But he's never been a head coach. So it's a risk. I think it's a risk for him to be the new head coach, albeit it's a calculated risk and it's probably one we're taking, but there's just no plan in place. Like they're signing players, they've signed Malachi Fekitoa. Like if Graham Rowntree is going to be the new head coach, he's not an attack coach. So like who is making these signings, and who's to say the attack coach that comes in doesn't really fancy Fekitoa? Now he's world class, like he will be a brilliant signing, but it's just all so muddled. I think
he's got a worrying injury profile, like he does. There's no point in.
But who is saying that Malachi Fekitoa is going to fit how Munster want to play next week? Because he's a very different type of player to Damien Dialende. So
do we know who the backroom team might include? Has there been any suggestion about what might be around? Like, is Mike Prendergast?
I don't think so. I mean, unless it's going to be a serious curveball, I don't think Mike Prendergast is going to be involved. Like he's still under contract at Racing. He's got a very good job there. He's working with world-class players. He's got a young family. They're well settled. Like life in Paris. Like I mean, there's worse places in the world to be. But my sense is that his head could have been turned, but I just don't know how hard Munster went after him back when it became clear that there was a position there. I think like if you want to go get a coach who's coaching one of the best attacks in the world and in Europe, you got to go after him, make him a deal that to turn his head to come home. And I don't know is the honest answer if they did that. So I don't know. The one name that keeps popping up is Milton Haig, who worked with Graham Rowntree at Georgia before. To come in possibly as a director of rugby, but it's strange because normally you'd through the grapevine you'd be hearing stuff, but like it's just all very quiet, and I genuinely don't know if there is a backroom team in place already. And when you think about how close we are to the end of the season now, that is worrying. So to get back to your original point, I think that feeds into from the top down, like the malaise that we're seeing in Munster. And yeah, like you talk about the women, it might get worse. Like if you look at Munster's fixtures over the next couple of weeks and the injuries that they have, it might get worse.
It's kind of mad that this season actually had that win against Wasps with the kids and Ian Costello in charge, and that thing actually happened this season when it felt like an all-time, not an all-time, a kind of maybe a 3 or 4 year high in terms of expectation and hope for the future.
Absolutely, and like you look at the young players who came off the bench against Leinster at the weekend, they're the ones who were really driving it and trying to change it. And I know like Johan van Graan has given young players their chance in the last, we'll say, year, but a lot of that has been down to COVID. There was an issue at the start where he kept going back to the tried and trusted players, and I think COVID helped in that regard because certain players were missing at different times, so he had to play the young players. But you look at someone like Alex Kendellen, who came off the bench at the weekend, like I thought he was outstanding. Now compare that to the impact, and absolutely zero impact that someone like Chris Kalita made on the game, and that guy is leaving at the end of the season. Going to Bath. Munster don't want to keep him. So
there's been the biggest opportunity blocker for young back rowers in Munster, and he has been mediocre at best. Like I've no idea what the thought process behind signing him or bringing him to the club was. I'm sure he's a very nice fella, and I'm sure he bought into the Munster vibes, and I'm sure he was an excellent teammate. But what is the strategy behind signing mediocre players? So he was Irish qualified after his 5 years here, right? Or maybe it was 3 years when he signed. But what's the point? We don't want them. We don't need mediocre back rowers. We have plenty. We have plenty of world class back rowers, and we have plenty of mediocre back rowers. It made no sense. Like, for me, their signing policy is a scattergun like Manchester United. Let's sign some superstars and let's sign a bunch of players. And it so happened that a bunch of those players were South African because the coach and the previous coach or previous director of rugby were South African. But what was the strategy behind it? What were they trying to achieve? I can't answer that.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think it said so much that when, like, Chris Clute, you know, became Irish qualified, I don't think there was a single person in the country saying that this guy should be in the squad. And, you know, if you're going to be cynical about it, when he was brought over, it was with the intention of capping him, because that was what the project player rule is for. So, look, I just think it's really frustrating when you see it. Like, fair enough if he's going to come in for the big games like last weekend and make an impact, but like Leinster just looked at him and said, we're just going to demolish him. He doesn't really offer a whole pile around a few breakdown steals in each game, and at that he concedes an awful amount of penalties. So I just compare that to someone like Alex Kendellen, who's grown up, you know, as a Munster fella. You know, he's captained the Ireland under-20s. I know he's still young and they have to mind him, but I just think the future is now for all these guys. You look at Craig Casey coming on, you look at Ben Healy, like Thomas Ahern, like...
Clute was getting in ahead of Jack O'Donoghue at times over the last 5 years. That made no sense.
He was, and it's like I said, it's really, really frustrating. But I think Munster have been given, like, they've been so lucky, not so lucky, but I think COVID has papered over the cracks in terms of this management team weren't trusting young players for a long, long time. And I know for a fact that was causing a lot of the players down there real disappointment that they weren't getting the chances, because they felt like as soon as the frontliners came back from international camp, they were rolling back into the team no matter how well they were playing. And you compare that to what Leinster do and what Leo Cullen does, and, you know, Munster fans are probably frustrated to compare themselves to Leinster, but you have to do that. You know, you have to do that. But Leinster always get the balance right, and we saw that again last Saturday. They didn't even start their front five and their pack still monstered Munster. So I think, like, Leinster always get the balance right between rewarding players who have been keeping the show on the road during the international windows and then easing the big guns back, which we'll see again this weekend with the likes of Johnny Sexton coming back. So it's really frustrating, but I think, like, the one note of optimism I would have about Munster is I do truly believe that there is a seriously talented young crop of players there. It just needs the next head coach to trust them now, and not in another 2 years to say, oh, Craig Casey, you know, when Conor Murray retires. These guys are putting the pressure on now, and they deserve to be rewarded.
If they had been beaten out the gate, now it might have been interesting to see what would have happened if Wasps hadn't been riddled with COVID, but if they'd been beaten out the gate and the kids had been completely incapable, but they weren't. That was the thing. Like,
do you know what I liked as well?
The academy is clearly really, really well run. They're very good at getting players to get to that level, and then they hit this brick wall of mediocrity that is preventing them from playing and getting game time and experience.
And the academy point is a really good one, Jared, because, like, it's been poor over the last few years and there's a lot of work still to do. But, like, someone like Ian Costello coming back, that's why I'm so glad that as far as I'm aware, he's not and has never been in the running to be one of the coaches on the Munster senior backroom team, because particularly, like, Owen, you mentioned the Wasps game. Around that, there would have been a lot of talk, you know, because they played such brilliant rugby that day, like, why not get Ian Costello in as attack coach? But his role is so important in aligning, like, the AIL has been, you know, disregarded as well across the country, but, like, that has always been such a bedrock of Munster's success. So I think someone like Ian Costello coming back has a really important role to play in terms of aligning the Munster system from the top down. And just one other quick point on the young lads. I thought it was really interesting, like I was over in France watching the match kind of on my phone on the go, and then I watched it back when I got home on Sunday. But the lack of kind of flashpoints in the first half for a Munster-Leinster derby, I just thought it was, like, crazy. Like, you know, Leinster coming down into Thomond Park, you always get one or two, and actually the two, I think it was only two that happened in the second half, both came from two of the younger Munster players. Thomas Ahern was involved in one, Finian Witcherdy. Like, I'm not saying that, you know, you need to make a scrap, but, like, they were the ones who were bringing the fight to Leinster, had no regard for the reputation. So I just think we need to see more of them now coming through from now until the end of the season, because it's all well and good saying the future, but what if the future is now?
100%. Okay, let's talk briefly about the Exeter team that they're going to face. I think the worst case scenario is coming through for the injury perspective from a Munster perspective. So far, anyway, there's some hope that Zebo might be back and Mike Haley might be back, and that would definitely help. And John Klein, I think, but the rest of them that they were kind of iffy about, it looks like it's bad news. Tygburn in particular probably won't make either of these two games. What kind of an Exeter team are they going to face?
Rejuvenated. They're definitely not the team they were, but they've strung a few results together in the last few weeks, that has them right back in contention in the Premiership. Look, you know what you're going to get from Exeter. Unbelievably tough physical pack. They're going to look to take the game to Munster, which in the style of play that Johan van Graan has been playing over the last while, like, it'll be interesting to see if Munster opt to go toe to toe with that. But you touched on the players, Jared, that they're missing. Like, you take Dave Kilcoyne, Tygburn and Gavin Coombs out of that pack. Now, any team would be weakened by missing them. So I don't know if Munster, have they got it within them to go toe-to-toe with that physical battle, or will they be brave enough to mix it up? Like, I thought it was interesting to see Joey Carberry going to full back again at the weekend. It's something that Ireland have done twice in recent months as well. So I'd be surprised if we saw Joey Carberry starting at full back, but I think that's a discussion that isn't going to go away anytime soon. You have the Ireland kind of situation lingering in the background because he's clearly Johnny Sexton's number 2. So I would like to see Munster play with a bit more ambition and try and stretch the Exeter defence. But like I said, they did that against Leinster, and Leinster still managed to pick them apart. I thought the skill level between Leinster and Munster was just frightening in terms of the difference. You think back to, I think a lot of times Munster have come up short. It's been that the skill level of the forwards just hasn't been on the same level. And to be fair now, I know Leinster had the starting Ireland back row and they were all outstanding, particularly Caelan Doris. But that front five is likely to be entirely changed for the Connacht game on Friday night. So you can't say that was a full choice Leinster pack. So, but even in terms of the back line, in terms of Munster, you compare Leinster's slick moves, and Munster just don't have that cohesion and that firepower in terms of starter plays. Like I said, it was like watching Ireland at times. So again, I don't know, do Munster have it within them then to play that expansive game in Exeter either? So look, I think it's going to be a very tough game, missing those key players. And I know the second, the two-legged thing kind of adds a different kind of dynamic to it, but they've got Ulster coming up after that as well, so it's a really, really tough run of form.
We've got Keith Wood in studio tomorrow, so we'll get into more detail around what needs to happen with regards to Munster in the short term and in the medium to long term as well. Let's talk a bit about Connacht and Leinster. How do you make the case for a Connacht win? You'd be a bit concerned that maybe this could be a train wreck.
Yeah, I was actually, when I was waiting at the gate to go to Toulouse on Friday, the Connacht squad were in the gate next to me going to Treviso, and I was chatting to a couple of them, and I wouldn't say there was a nervous tension, but there was a serious realisation that they had to win last weekend, and they did, but it wasn't all that convincing, and they made tough work for themselves. Connacht's defence has been a real issue for them this season, and like I said, you look at how slick that Leinster attack was, and you're going to probably see Johnny Sexton coming back into the team this weekend as well. So it is very hard to make the case. I'm not a big fan. I don't know what you lads think. I'm not a big fan of the two-legged affairs that we're going to see over the next couple of weeks. I just hate the tinkering with the Champions Cup in general.
Maybe for a final where the two teams in it are going to be relatively equally matched, apart from that year that Leinster played Ulster. But
I'm a traditionalist, and I hate the tinkering that they've done. Even the pool stages have been rubbish, in my opinion. They're so hard to follow. The sooner, if it ever does go back to the normal format, the better. But I think the two-legged ties give a serious disadvantage to the likes of Connacht, who are definitely capable, I think, of springing an upset against Leinster in a once-off game, particularly at the sports ground. But you think over two legs like Leinster, it could be if Connacht don't get it right and don't keep within touch. I think in the first leg it could be over aggregated. I think it could be a really big score.
If you think about that Ulster-Leinster game, the Aviva in 2019. Had that been a second leg, that's kind of like a magical moment because Ulster came so close. But if there was a second 80 minutes going down the line, you would have been like, well, what's what's the point here? I mean, there's probably every chance that Leinster will kind of blow them away in the second leg. It's probably going to be one of those that they do this year and that's it.
I mean,
maybe we're being too negative. Maybe there's going to be like some incredible second leg ties here, but
like Leinster have been flaky in the first 15 minutes in big quarterfinals where the ball has been bouncing back off an upright, and it's like suddenly they're 14 points down, and
which is why you wanted to be only one leg.
Well, they've turned it into interesting games by. And then you realise that they'll blow a team out in a semi-final.
Yeah.
So maybe that's it. Maybe a little bit of complacency seeps into this Leinster team.
Yeah, and they like Leinster still have issues, lads, as well. Like, I mean, the fact they're signing Jason Jenkins, you know, and Charlie Natoi next season, like two physical players, like I still think they're so hung up on the physical gap that the likes of Saracens and La Rochelle last season showed. So the problem is Connacht absolutely don't have that firepower to expose whatever flaws might be within the Leinster team. So I think it's until you get to the latter stages that Leinster will be really tested, because, like I said, they haven't quite addressed the power gap that they clearly see they have within their team.
Talk to us about Charlie Natoi.
Yeah, so he's a former All Black who's been playing for Leon for the last few seasons. So it looks like he's going to be signing. He's a centre. A strange signing. As much as I can see why Leinster are signing Jason Jenkins, but like I'm struggling with it at the same time. Like two parts of my mind, but. Charlie Natoi is a 12 who can play 13, so he's obviously coming in as backup to Robbie Henshaw and Gary Ringrose. I don't think Robbie Henshaw's new contract has been announced yet, so I think a few Leinster fans were panicking when they saw that Charlie Natoi was on his way to Leinster, that maybe Robbie Henshaw was off, but I don't think that's the case at all. So yeah, like it's a strange. I mean, like you think back to Leinster's overseas signings over the last few years, they've been kind of, you know, grizzled veterans who have been kind of proven stars. Now, Charlie Natoi was obviously capped by the All Blacks a few times, but like has been in France for the last few years, playing with Lyon, not exactly one of the top teams. So it'll be interesting to see how he fits in. But
they've gone after those Antipodean centres over the last couple of years, and many of them have come in and played sporadically, but never in the big games.
And Charlie Natoi isn't going to play in the big games, you would assume, unless Robbie Henshaw is injured. But then what does that mean for someone like Kieran Frawley, who is I would say one of the most exciting young players in the country? So yeah, like I would say it's a strange signing. I think if you're bringing in like someone like a Damien Dialende, who is going to be like a guaranteed starter and like proven world class, I think, you know, you can understand it. So, and also Charlie Natoi, you know, you mentioned Malachi Fekitoa having his injuries. Natoi had a series of concussions a couple of years ago that I remember kept him out of the game for a long time as well. So yeah, Leinster are signing two guys next season. Jason Jenkins, who's obviously hardly played this season for Munster. I know he played against Leinster, started last week, and Natoi, who has also had his injury problems. So probably a bit of risk in both of those signings too, you'd have to say.
The Toulouse-Ulster game, Ulster obviously on the way back from their mini tour to South Africa, they're not in bad stead considering what happened. You know, they come away having put in a really good performance and an okay performance and nursing some grievances, but having bonded a lot of those young players, and I don't know, I think there's a lot happening to be excited about from an Ulster perspective at the moment.
There is, as Eddie O'Sullivan would say, I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid on Ulster just yet, though. I don't know, I still think I'd be surprised if they get through Toulouse over two legs. I still think their front five has big issues, lack of power, particularly in the depth. Once you go down the depth chart, guys coming off the bench, and I think that'll be shown up. But they're definitely building something. I think Dan McFarland has done a really good job, and crucially their academy now is starting to produce players. Even you look at the Ireland under-20 success recently, they had Ruben Crothers, who was the captain, Jude Postlewaite in the centre, like two guys who looked to have a really bright future ahead of them. And you know, it was interesting being in Toulouse last weekend, lads. I was so tempted. I was really hoping that my boss might ask me to stay there for the week and just cover the Ulster game this weekend, because it's not a bad place to be. But like, rugby is just such... I had actually never been in Toulouse. I'd passed through it before a few weeks ago, actually, to get to Cast when Munster were playing over there. But it's such a rugby city. It reminds me of Limerick in a way. Like a few years ago, when Munster were... The times, actually, ironically enough, when I was talking about people were queuing on the streets overnight to get tickets, Munster had like a superstore shop in the middle of town on O'Connell Street, and it was great. Like, but Toulouse have one of them in the centre now. And even I was thinking, like, for all of like Leinster's success, like, don't know, have they ever had one? Certainly I don't think they have one now in Dublin or anywhere. So rugby is just such a religion over there. Like even one of the first things I spotted after the taxi dropped me off from the airport was a poster on a shop window advertising the Ulster game next weekend. So like a big crowd came out for the women's game last weekend, so I'd say the atmosphere over in Toulouse this weekend is going to be incredible. So but I think it's a massive test for Ulster, and like you said, they're coming back from South Africa. I think they will have gotten a lot out of it, but I still think they're a little bit short in the power stakes, and obviously Toulouse have so many of the French Grand Slam winning team as well, so they're a serious outfit. Yeah, I don't know if you see Dupont's bit of excellence at the weekend as well. It was just magic. Anyone who hasn't seen it should look it up. Just typified how absolutely sensational he is.
This is the clip popped up on my Twitter feed of and I was like, oh, that was pretty good from Dupont, but actually it's not the first thing he does, which is like a 60-yard break from the base of the scrum. He gets absolutely smashed, and he's at the bottom of a ruck, slowly getting up, kind of looking like he's a little bit out of it, but actually what he's doing is surveying the field, and then pings this kick. That's the one you're talking about, is it?
Yeah, it's just absolutely crazy. He's like
ludicrous.
He's like another back row playing, and then like you said, he looks like, he might need to catch his breath here, and then all of a sudden he has this peripheral vision and not just sees the crossfield kick, but also just inch perfect. Like, he's just magic. So Ulster will have a job in his hands to keep him quiet.
The Off the Ball Twitter account asked, is there a better sports person in the world right now than Antoine Dupont?
After that,
yeah,
and after his GQ kind of sensation with his yellow kind of dressing gown or whatever.
Oh, I missed this.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
That's another thing you should look up. Yeah, he was on the front cover of it wearing like what you'd call, well, if he was in South Dublin, they might call it a dry robe.
A dry robe, yeah.
That's our only hope here, isn't it? That like the absolute French success goes to his head, that he becomes like a megastar.
Yeah, and I'd be very interested to see how the French kind of the rugby kind of people see that, because I think Itoje is a bit of the same, but I think rugby not to go down a rabbit hole here, but I think rugby really needs to promote its stars, like its world stars. It doesn't do enough to do that at all, and right now, Dupont is just
the
incredible.
Blazers are suspicious of the stars.
The Blazers are suspicious of the yellow dry robes. What is this guy doing? But when he's delivering performances like that, he can wear what he likes.
As they wear one themselves. Oh, we're going to get in trouble. Bordeaux versus La Rochelle. I don't think anybody in the world would have been that interested in this until what happened at the weekend. Outside of France and outside of it's a local Atlantic derby. It's important, obviously. It's two storied teams, but the rest of the world would have been kind of happy to go along their merry way and keep an eye on how their own teams are doing. But all of a sudden, everybody in Ireland's going, what's going to happen here? Who's going to stand on the touchline?
Yeah, and everyone's watching to see the future England head coach as well, to see how he gets on, So that, which was another just classic Ronan O'Gara, unbelievable moment. You can't just but love him. I know you have him on the show like all the time, and it must be magic from your point of view, because you just don't know what he's going to give you. But yeah, it's interesting, I suppose. The fact that they played last week, it's great because it gives it the narrative in terms of what happened, but if you look at even Racing and Stad played last weekend as well, and they're going to play each other now, so 3 weeks in a row. And I'm always disappointed when the Champions Cup throws up ties this early in the knockout stages with teams from the same league. Like, I'm disappointed like Leinster and Connacht are playing each other. I like seeing teams from different leagues going up against each other. So yeah, in that point, you always kind of look out for the Irish interests within the other teams. So you're looking at Mike Prendergast and how the Racing attack is going. You're looking at La Rochelle and how Rog is going. And I think what's been interesting is with the influx of Irish players and coaches in France over the last couple of years, Donncha Ryan was the same at Racing, is they've really helped, I think, change certain French clubs' focus when it comes to the Champions Cup, because Toulouse have always had it because they have the pedigree, they have the history, but teams like La Rochelle and Racing less so. But Rog has obviously come into La Rochelle and said, no, we're not sacking this off. So I think that's brilliant for the competition. They went so close last year. Racing are the same. I think when Donncha Ryan was there, he played a massive role in that, and now Mike Prendergast is doing the same. So it's brilliant for the competition, and like you said, everyone is going to be watching to see if we're going to get round two between O'Gara and Urias. It was mad stuff, really, wasn't it? And you're kind of just still enjoying that, and then he comes out and tells TV that he'd love to coach England. So I can't imagine England-Ireland weeks covering that would be something else.
Munster up against Exeter this weekend, and I see Austin Healy is saying that Rob Baxter not the man for England in his Telegraph column. So Rog in the box seat.
Well, like they do have a few candidates, and Andy Farrell is certainly going to be in the mix-up as well. Like obviously, depending on how he gets on at the World Cup with Ireland, and particularly maybe, you know, if he was to get a win over New Zealand this summer, you know, be the first Irish coach to do it, would be incredible. So there'd be no shortage of suitors, but like for O'Gara to throw his hat in the ring like that was just so audacious and so classic him. Maybe he might get another 0 on his La Rochelle contract maybe, but yeah, you just got to love how he plays the game. He's a master at it, isn't he?
All right, anything else we should be looking out for over the rest of those ties?
Yeah, I suppose, like, I mean, like I mentioned Racing there, like you have Mike Prendergast, and I think there's always a bit of Irish in Bristol as well. They're going up against Sale. They've had a really tough season, and I think the fact that there's no relegation in the Premiership this season has taken, obviously, the jeopardy out of it. Even you see Ealing Trailfinders winning the championship last week and they don't get promoted. So I think ordinarily, if it had been the case, Bristol are kind of languishing near the end of the table, so they might have had one eye on, you know, ensuring their survival, whereas now they can actually have a crack at the Champions Cup. But for a team who've invested so heavily, like financially, you know, and have got in a bit of trouble for it, and given, what was it, Pat Lamside signed like a 5-year contract, they've really fell short of expectations this season. So there's plenty of Irish interest there with the likes of Nee Adeoloken, Brian Byrne, and John Muldoon. So they're going up against Sale, who have been rejuvenated, I think, under Alex Sanderson, who's another guy who's been tipped as a potential replacement for Eddie Jones. So that'd be worth keeping an eye on as well. So I suppose the round 16, it does throw up plenty of good clashes, and I think, despite the fact I'm not a fan of the two legs, I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
All right.